the White House is very seriously considering all of those worst case scenarios with the deployment of some sort of weapon of mass destruction from the Russian side. Let's go ahead and put the New York Times tear sheet up on the screen. And this is fairly bombshell report here. U.S. is making contingency plans in case Russia uses its most powerful weapons. Let me read you a little bit of this article. They say the White House has quietly assembled a team of national security officials to sketch out scenarios of how the U.S. and its allies should respond if Putin, frustrated by his lack of progress in Ukraine or determined to warn Western nations against intervening in the war, unleashes his stockpiles of chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons. They're calling this the Tiger Team. That's what the group is known as. They're examining responses. Also, if Putin reaches into NATO territory to attack convoys, remember he said those convoys of weapons are legitimate targets, to attack convoys bringing weapons and aid to Ukraine. The team is also looking at responses if Russia seeks to extend the war to neighboring nations, including Moldova and Georgia, and how to prepare European countries for the refugees flowing in on a scale not seen in decades. So this goes back also to what we led with which is Biden in Europe today. One of those meetings with the other 29 NATO member countries is closed door, just with the leaders, no cell phones and no aides. And the expectation is that they will be going through each one of these potential scenarios. And, expectation is the U.S. would sort of lead the analysis of what they think each of the responses should be to each one of these terrifying scenarios. And so that really makes it plain of what a dangerous situation we're in and why we are so uncomfortable when words like war criminals and war crimes are thrown around, and when the Ukrainians are not empowered with the ability to sort of unilaterally roll back sanctions and really bring something to the table, when there seems to be no concern about creating any sort of an off-ramp or persuading Russia that if they did negotiate and if they did stop the war, that those sanctions would ultimately be rolled back, because that landscape makes one of these horrifying scenarios all that much more likely.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this a lot in the beginning. If the prospect of nuclear war is 1%, that's still way too high. And honestly, I think it's probably higher right now. Let's put this next one up there on the screen, which is that the defense secretary and the general of the Joint Chiefs of Staff have repeatedly tried to call their counterparts over the last month, but the Russians have, quote, so far declined to engage. That's a big, big problem. So I mentioned earlier in the show that we did have a meeting between a U.S. military embassy attaché and a Russian military kind of guy who was assigned. But those are low-level meetings. The most important thing that we can have is communication at the very, very top levels of the U.S. military. And the reason that we have those, these are called deconfliction lines at the highest level, is specifically so in the event that something crazy goes on, you call and you're like, hey, is this real? Like, is this really happening? Now, we don't know necessarily, but it's a way in order to make it so that we don't have miscalculations. And the Russians, I would submit this. Absent a time of war, we should never have a situation where a nuclear-armed power is refusing to engage with us at the highest levels of military leadership. And here's the other reason. Let's put this, actually, we don't have the element for this, but it's another important quote within this quote. A senior administration official said any use of a small tactical or nuclear weapon by Russia, even inside of Ukraine, and not directed at a NATO member, would mean, quote, all bets are off on the United States and NATO staying out of the war. So he is then laying a soft red line here, saying if you use even a small tactical nuclear weapon inside of Ukraine, NATO and the United States would declare war then on Russia. And in a sense, it would then be a Russian confrontation. And this is always the issue, right? Which is that it's a gray area, which is that we don't have an obligation to defend Ukraine. And this sounds callous, but we do whenever it comes to NATO. I think it'd be a horrible humanitarian event, but I'm talking specifically from the use of military force by the United States. So we would then have to take a conscious decision for the part of the United States in order to confront Putin over the use of a nuclear weapon in a country which borders him and of which does not have a treaty obligation for us to do so, which would also almost certainly invite a nuclear confrontation between these two powers. And, we shouldn't. I feel like I've been erasing, too, maybe some of these other European states. France and the UK also have large nuclear arsenals. These are nuclear powers in their own right. They also have, nuclear doctrine, and they would certainly get involved because their countries would be absolutely destroyed and wiped off of the map as well. So if you just think about it, things can get ugly very, very quickly. The fact that they're opening the door and keeping the door open to nukes, that we are refusing, or that they are refusing to talk to us, and that we are then now floating soft red lines here in the pages of the New York Times. I mean, look, they're only raising these red lines if they think it's a real possibility, which means you think it's a real possibility.
That's right. And there's a few things worth noting here. First of all, I think that they quote a Supreme Allied Commander of NATO from 2009 to 2013, who says, I think he lays out just how dangerous this is very well. Very young people are flying in jets, operating warships, and conducting combat operations in the Ukrainian war. They are not seasoned diplomats, and their actions in the heat of operations can be misunderstood. We must avoid a scenario of NATO and Russia sleepwalking into war because senior leaders can't pick up a phone and explain to each other what is happening. And that's the horror scenario all along of, the dramatic escalation that we have witnessed in a very short period of time, things that were previously off the table suddenly not only becoming possible, but being implemented with very little debate, with very little consideration. And so the terrifying situation is that you are sort of stumbling into a direct war and a direct conflict without even really stopping to think about what you're doing. They say not just that if there was some sort of tactical nuclear weapon deployed on Ukrainian soil, would that potentially be a soft red line? But they even raise the possibility of, if there was a chemical or biological weapons attack that was technically on Ukrainian soil, but the impact of which was felt to some extent in a NATO country, does that constitute an attack on a NATO ally? And they raise that possibility and they don't answer the question. So again, these are terrifying scenarios. Biden has been repeatedly warning of the possibility of the use of a chemical or biological attack in Ukraine. The intelligence community, got certain critical things right in the run-up to this, so I wouldn't completely dismiss them out of hand. And they are obviously taking all of these possibilities very seriously and sketching out the scenarios right now today with our NATO allies in Europe.
Yeah, and look, it's not like the Russians haven't poisoned a lot of people in the past, so they don't have the same level of taboo, especially the Putin regime, whenever it comes to this. And it certainly could be, this could be a really big problem.
Hey guys, we're going to be totally upfront with you. This is the most perilous time that we have ever operated in.
It is so difficult just to try to sort through the news, but even more importantly, to bring you accurate information as this wave of lockdown and censorship spreads across the nation.
Yeah, look, if you can become a premium subscriber today at breakingpoints.com, you're going to help us build out a vibrant, independent media ecosystem which is free of mainstream pressure. We can't tell you how important that is at a time like this.
Yep, that's right. Go to breakingpoints.com to subscribe. We love you guys and we appreciate you so much.